All right, welcome again to Social Distillation, the submarine still of the internet, where we attempt to drop the bead and pour white lightning straight onto your brain. What are we talking about today, Sebo?
Well, we've got Wheel of Time. It's Friday, and we did miss our social episode this week, but we might do a quickie later. But we always
Mhm.
prioritize Wheel of Time because that's where most of the subscribers come from, and all the comments come from the Wheel of Time.
Frankly,
Uh,
it's more fun than the Wednesday crap usually.
and today's White Lightning is a little scotch. I finally found a scotch I like, and I
Ooh,
went on the sample day, and I said, "Oh, I don't like scotch because it's too much peat," and she said, "Oh no, this is a floral peat." And it was like, I've never heard of a floral peat.
yeah.
It is a much more palatable thing.
Speaking of alcohol, Ideals are Isomorphic says, "Hey Sam, yes, I'm Russian." See what I did there. I've read the first 12 books in Russian and the last two in English because the books are in the process of being printed. They have great covers though. That's I'm gonna have to look that up then and see what the international covers are and if they're better. Um, I lost my train of thought there. I can't tell if I have brain fog or if it's just from being so tired because I slept pretty much all day Tuesday and Wednesday except when the fever and the body aches woke me up or the need to throw up woke me up. So I don't know if I have brain fog or if the commie cough just made me really tired. Um, I will say I don't know if anyone else has experienced this lately, but the last couple of times that I thought I've had it, it wasn't that bad. It was just annoying. This feels much more like the first time I got it, just not lasting as long, just short and hard, giggity. Uh, to your point on Logain, Sam, I remember making a similar comment earlier in regards to Taim, but it made me sad we didn't get more Rand Logain comradeship. Yes, comrade. Rand needed an ally who could be a legitimate threat to him, which is a good point. I hadn't really thought before that that's really the point that Logain was supposed to serve, because even someone like Bashir, he could only stand up to Rand so much. Because
Hmm.
in the end, he was Rand's general, so it's okay, go do this. Even
Well,
Matt could only stand up to Rand so much, and finally would acquiesce and fine, I'll go do this thing because I'm technically your general now.
and there's also a part in the section we're going over today that was a missed opportunity with Logain because we have a spot today where Rand is lamenting Demandred
Yeah.
of the way he turned to the shadow, and he says that
Hmm.
was my fault as Luce Theron.
That's a
And
good point.
we could have had it play out without him saying it in his head, where he did it right with Logain, where there's a tense relationship, there's some
Yeah.
jealousy, there's a little bit of a power differential, but Rand actually does it right. And
That's that's a really good point I hadn't considered before, and is going to come into more focus towards the end of the book when Logain comes back into frame and starts, being heroic. But there's a moment there, not to get too far ahead of ourselves, where it looks like he's not going to slip to the dark capital D dark friend, but like kind of embrace the darkness because of the crap he's been through, right? That he's becoming more hardened. And if rather than the way he kind of gets pulled out of that, if he pulled away from that hardness, from that darkness, because of a friendship with Rand, that would have, kind of squared that circle better for both characters.
mhm.
Um, just let's to the rest of Ideal's point here. Someone he could have a partnership with, not just a protector subject relationship he basically has with everyone else. It was written masterfully by RJ in the Knife of Dreams with the tension between those two. I needed more of that. There are bits and pieces later, I guess, and I cherish them. Uh, that is a good point, that when we finally get that, what we've kind of been waiting for, what he's kind of been teasing for a long time, this idea that Logain has more to do still, and then when they finally meet, it is really awkward. And at first, you're thinking, this isn't what I was expecting, but the more he writes that tension between the two of them, the more it makes sense and the better it is. Now, this is something I hadn't considered, which makes me go, oh. Um, Heath, you say Tominus is one of the better characters by Sanderson, but I think Sanderson writing Tominus is the closest Sanderson comes to writing a proper Matt. That may be what's wrong with both of them because that's not how it should be. But actually, that's an insight I hadn't heard before, and I think that comes pretty close to nailing it. So yeah, good Sanderson, bad Sanderson. Um, chapter one, then on to chapter one, and hopefully we'll get through chapter four here because I won't say there's not a lot going on. There's not a lot that I have notes on because a big chunk of chapters three, well, two, three, and four is what's going on with Androl and Pevara in the Black Tower. So there's a fair bit of action going on there. I really wanted to get to chapter five, but chapter five and six go together and are longer than I remembered because that's when Rand finally reveals what it is he's been up to. And I think we probably need more time there, so I didn't want to rush through those. So hopefully we'll get through chapter four here. But it starts, I finally we have some what I would say is both closure and a new start, which is the boys getting back together, sort of, except it's just Rand and Perrin.
Mm-hmm.
And so it feels like there's an element of closure there that they're finally the friends are finally coming back together and they're more than friends. It's something, we finally get a good lengthy Rand point of view section here, and he's noting how different Perrin is, but also how similar he is. And so how, in a sense, this reunion couldn't have happened earlier because, and we kind of saw it whenever Rand, well, we didn't kind of see it when the last time Rand and Perrin were together, Rand almost killed Perrin. And he's
Mm-hmm.
not, remember, he's wondering to himself, was I acting or did I actually lose it there and nearly kill Perrin because of what we were arguing about in that what was supposed to be a feigned argument and then what turned into a real argument.
Well, and that's you talk about power differentials with Bashir. The same thing with Perrin. We have that fight where he's kind of having that internal monologue uh, because he almost killed his friend. We get it with Min as well. That's
Mm,
another place Logain could have, to our point on Logain, they could have had a drag out fight where Rand gets the upper hand, but just barely because he is just barely stronger.
mm,
And but Logain is just like get a grip of yourself the whole fight, where Rand is
yeah,
actually raging. And that's like the schoolyard fight where two people end up respecting each other afterwards, kind of thing.
yeah,
Like
that's
I
a good
was
point.
stronger, but dang, he was pretty damn good.
I was
You
stronger,
know?
but he was the bigger man.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, yeah. Um, the thing that jumps out at me here, where is it? So there's a thought that he has um on the bottom of page 77 here.
Oh, I got a thought before that then.
Okay.
And this is a meta thought. So keep this in mind because this is something you specifically said you wanted to keep an eye on, which is the dream world and
Hmm.
how it is involved in being kind of the hub between the metaphysics of this world. He has the thought it's the very oh well, your pages are different. Shit.
Yep. Yep.
Okay. Well, this
What
is
did
when
we
he's
figure last time that I'm off by about a dozen pages or so?
but it's different. And I think I figured
Yeah.
out an equation we can use, but I forgot to do it before we started, and we're kind of pressed for time. But it's where Rand, and you tell me if where this is in your text, where Perrin asks of how it feels to have the memories he's gained. And Rand
Yeah.
is explaining to Perrin what it is like to remember being Lews Therin.
Yeah, and he talks about how it's like a dream.
Yeah, I can remember doing what he did as one
Hmm.
remembers actions in a dream. It was me doing them, but I don't necessarily like them or think I'd take those actions if I were to in my waking mind. That doesn't change the fact that in the dream they seem like they were the right actions. So he is actually living that past life in a dreamlike state. And so that the soul, the hub between the previous soul and him, now we see is
Mm,
connected through the dream world.
I hadn't thought about that. Yeah.
And
The
because he has access to the dream world as someone so strong in the power, he can actually differentiate that. Whereas your heroes of the Horn, they lose sight of that. Birgitte has sight of it because she came straight from the dream. And
hmm
even now she's losing sight of it. It's becoming more like a real dream to her than actual real memories.
hmm Yeah, and she talks about how she has to concentrate
Mhm.
to think of those previous lives, and a lot of times now it won't even come to her, no matter how much she tries to concentrate on previous lives. I hadn't thought about that before, that the idea that it's like a dream may be more than just a metaphor.
Mhm.
That for Rand, he's using a metaphor so that Perrin can understand, but it's quite possible, if not probable, that the intent of the author there is for more than a metaphor, to tie the dream world back into everything here. Um, Before that, uh, though, uh, while they're chatting, sharing stories, um, Rand has a couple of interesting thoughts. He's become harder, Rand thought, but somehow he hasn't lost that innocence of his, not completely. To Rand, that seemed a marvelous thing, a wonder like a pearl discovered in a trout. Perrin was strong, but his strength hadn't broken him. Uh, which is the kind of insight that Rand was trying to discover. That others, the people who were teaching him the difference between strength and hardness were trying to teach him, is that idea that you can be so strong that your own strength breaks you. Bo Jackson is the most horrific example of that. That for anyone who doesn't know, Bo Jackson could have gone down as arguably the greatest. I mean, he'd be up there with Jim Thorpe and Jackie Robinson, and other multi-sport athletes that we hold in high regard, except for the fact that he was so freaking strong, he literally tore his own hip out of its socket because someone was trying to tackle him, and he was jerking his leg so hard it tore his hip out of its socket, and it was a really dang horrific injury. His own strength broke him.
Mhm.
Is a
Well, you see
very
this
real
with
example of that.
you can see this with normal people in a more drastic situation. If you break your femur, one of the reasons your femur is one of the worst bones to break, irrespective of the fact that you can sever your femoral artery, but the femur bone itself is when it breaks, the muscles are so strong, the thigh muscles are so strong that they'll contract and you'll basically suck your leg
Oof.
short, and they have to actually use traction to spread it back out
Oh,
because
that's painful.
anybody who knows anything about muscle spasms, when the bone has an issue or a joint has an issue, the muscles won't let go because they say I'm helping, but they're not helping because
Yeah.
they basically
I need
pull it
to
like that.
immobilize you before you hurt yourself more.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and so they have to use traction to basically rip those muscles open without ripping them, and then set the bone, and then put a brace on that doesn't let it suck back in. So that's why I don't break your femur. That sucks. I
Yeah.
came very close one time. I came very, very close, and that was because of stupid MMA drills. But
Um, where's the other thought? So then a little farther down, he kind of crystallizes this thought about the both of them, which is strange how much a man could change while his core remained exactly the same. Um, and this is uh, the reason I think this has as much, if not more, to do with Rand than Perrin is that on the next page, Perrin asks him, "We already talked about this," presumably referring to Lord of Chaos when they met up in Camelin after having been away for a while, and and he's telling the stories of Perrin in the Two Rivers, not what Perrin has been doing on Rand's mission. which I hadn't really noticed before. That I think that matters. That's what they're talking about, not so how did things go in Geldan, because New Rand doesn't care as much about that. As he says, when Rand answers Perrin, I asked about the events, but I did not ask after the people. And that really crystallizes how New Rand is New Rand, but also Old Rand, because Old Rand cares about the people.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and that is where you saw when Rand started to slip away. That's what was slipping, was that care for the people. He couldn't bridge that divide between, the maidens being the stark example there of I I should care, you know, when these women die, and especially when they die for me, but I also can't let it destroy me.
Well, it was one of those examples of fake it till you make it. It's the poker face becomes you. At first he was trying to just not let the Forsaken know he cared,
Mm-hmm.
and his poker face got so good it became him.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
Yeah, I hadn't really thought about it in those terms before. Um, then we get an Egwene point of view,
Oh
uh,
yeah, I've got a funny note on that one.
which is pretty good. It's Egwene being pretty good, as far as
Um,
good Egwene goes. But there is a moment here, um, where so it's when she's a couple pages into her point of view here, when she's talking to Elaine, and um, she's using uh she's using a revered commentary and translation of the prophecies to make her point. Basically, you know, not wrongly making the point that the one of my titles is Keeper of the Seals, and that ain't, you know, that's not like the monarch. I don't remember how long it was, but the monarch of England for hundreds of years after the end of the Hundred Years' War still claimed the title of monarch of France. That was still part of the official title for the monarch of England, and I don't remember when they finally dropped that. Um, but it ain't nothing. I'm the keeper of the seals, therefore it's not just, selfishness for me to say this is my job. It's my job. I need to take it seriously. I need to be the one, that decides when or if these seals are going to be broken. And she makes the comment to Elaine that where it is it's halfway down 84 on my copy here. Um, if it has to be done, and I still don't know that it has to be, we should wait until the last possible moment. At the very least, we need to discuss it. Rand has been right about many things, but he has been wrong too. This is not a decision he should be allowed to make alone. Okay, then, Egwene, dear leader, why can't you just say that instead of what she was doing before Elaine came in, which was writing a forceful letter to Rand? Just go talk to the dude
mhm.
and say, hey, we need to talk this out where there isn't a hall, where there aren't a bunch of other people, where it's just you and me, and then maybe you and me and some of our trusted people. No, it's everyone else I've ever trusted who are wrong. Exactly.
Yeah, so my note here was Egwene deserves Gawain because they are exactly the same. We use this meme with Gawain all the
Yeah.
time,
Yeah.
and in this conversation, Elaine's like, "Well, maybe he's right." And she laments in her own head that why is everybody against me, and she has that basically that meme is a paraphrasing of her thoughts here. It's not
Hmm.
me that's wrong, it's everybody else that's wrong, everybody I've ever trusted that's wrong. And even
Hmm.
to go to a metaphysical part of it, her explanation of why breaking the seals is the end of the world is wrong, because the seals were made to close the bore where the Dark One could touch the world. And she's saying if you break the seals, he will be released. No, when the bore was open, he was still not released.
Hmm.
There's
He
a
just
difference. Yeah.
he just had more influence on the world.
Yeah, and she's right. Eventually, he could get out that way, but
Yeah.
at the same time, just breaking the seals does not release him. It
Yeah,
just reopens the bore.
and I can't remember if it's in this part or another part where so it's known now that Rand remembers being Lews Therin, or at least amongst amongst a number of people, amongst the people closest to him, it's known. And I can't remember if it's here or later that Elaine makes the point of, he's the one who made the seals, right? So maybe he knows what he's talking about. And Egwene makes the point, basically makes the point doesn't that just make him more crazy? That he's got this fully fledged personality and that he can remember his past life, and it's like,
Well, but that's the thing. Being crazy is being out of touch with reality. If this was truly a past life, then that's the reality. That's reality.
mm-hmm,
And
mm-hmm,
they're throwing this crazy around, this word crazy around, when
yeah,
actually denying that those
yeah,
memories are real is more crazy than accepting them at this point.
yeah. Um, and then they find out that Caemlyn's been overrun by Trollocs. Um, I do like that when Nynaeve comes hurrying up. I not only that she's the one to heal Tominus, of course, because she's awesome, but the way she does it, where she just rolls in like a boss, and then even as many things as Egwene has done herself that are incredible, and as often as she's seen Nynaeve do this kind of thing, Tominus is so far gone that the explosion of power from Nynaeve is still impressive to Egwene when she heals him, because she's just that awesome. Um, I have a note here when it switches back to Rand and Perrin, and now
Well, I did have a note to
don't
give
know
Egwene a little
why.
credit. She did have
Yeah.
what I consider her best moment of the post becoming the Emerald seat, Egwene, when she does have that thought in her head, I am servant to all, I can lend my strength to you, to Nynaeve. There you go. We need more of that.
Um, Speaking of the madness, um, well, first of all, I like that the opening back to this section is Fail has been organizing my network of eyes and ears. She might be there with them tonight. I'll warn you, I'm not certain she likes you. She would be a fool to like me. She probably knows what I'm going to require of you before this is over, is what
Yeah,
Rand thinks.
but the
Um,
all of us that have, had our group of guy friends and have dated to any kind of extent, yeah, if at least once encountered the girlfriend that wanted to pull you away from the bros because she doesn't like the
mhm,
bros because when the things she's trying to change about you are counteracted by the bros,
mhm.
and everybody knows when a girl dates a guy, she's going to try to change him in some way, and the guy stays the same, and then she changes. So it's that's just normal. That's normal human behavior there.
Yeah, and as we've seen, I know it was a point against her in some of the anti-Fail forums back in the day, but I think it is genuinely clear that she is doing it out of not less to, you're a bad influence on Perrin, but genuinely, you're gonna get my husband hurt or killed, and she's not wrong there. And Rand's even thinking,
Well,
yeah,
she's
she's
not
not
wrong
wrong
there,
there,
but she also does a lot of things that can get him hurt and killed. So
and herself, yeah. Um, but then they have this interesting conversation on madness. I think she still worries you'll go mad and hurt me. The madness has already come, Rand said, and I have it in my grip. As for hurting you, she's probably right. I don't think I can avoid hurting those around me. It was a hard lesson to learn. You implied that you're mad, um, but Rand, you're not. You don't seem at all crazy to me. Um, Rand smiled and a thought fluttered at the edge of his mind. I am mad, Perrin. My madness is these memories, these impulses. Lews Therin tried to take over. I was two people fighting over control of myself. and one of them was completely insane. Light, Perrin whispered. That sounds horrible. It wasn't pleasant, but here's the thing, Perrin. I'm increasingly certain that I needed these memories. Luce Theron was a good man. I was a good man. But things went wrong. I grew too arrogant. I assumed I could do everything myself. I needed to remember that. Without the madness, without these memories, I might have gone charging in alone again. Now I
Which
finally remember what my note means. So my note here, I was trying to remember what the heck does this even mean, was this is why Rand wouldn't kill baby Hitler.
hmm,
Because I think we briefly mentioned this last time, this thought experiment of would you kill baby Hitler? And it's, to your point, the butterfly effect of doing that, of how radically that would change the world, of people who would have been born and now are never born. You just think about the direct effect of, oh, well, you would save these people. Okay, but then what are the after effects?
hmm.
And to Rand's point, yeah, hey, if I could go
Well,
back, would I change myself and what I did? Well, if you did, then what would be the after effects? If you did, then would you be able to do what you have to do now?
well, and also just think of it from even the take away the bosun brain probability effect of who's not alive now because just things were
Hmm.
different
Hmm.
and genetics are what they are. Think of how much atrocity we have avoided because we have a glaring example in semi-recent history of what it looks like when evil arises.
Yeah,
What would the signal have been about Mussolini had Hitler not done the things he did? He
that's a good
could
point.
have slowly created an empire that nobody knew was even forming until it was too late. But we had this thing that just went too far too fast that basically told the world, hey, we got to do something right now. So it's not even just the probabilities like I talked about last
Mm.
time. It's the fact that we can look at recent history and say, oh, that's what evil looks like. And we can try to prevent it.
Well, we can try, or the flip side to that would be that then we get so afraid of it we don't, which is a lot of what the containment philosophy
Mhm.
was, you know, the Chamberlain is the Neville Chamberlain is the poster child for appeasement, but he was hardly the only one. And I would contend that the appeasement ideal got turned up to 11 in the post-war world because the war to end all wars was dwarfed in its horror with what happened in World War II. And so, as bad as the evil of the various communist regimes were, there was this genuine fear of, okay, but dare we confront it directly, or should we just contain it? Because we saw what the last World War did, and this one will have nuclear weapons. So we just have to contain it. We can't confront it. And so you let Stalin run wild, you let Mao run wild, you let Pol Pot run wild, you know Che and all the
Mhm.
moronic dingleberries wearing his stupid shirt, you know, and the horrors that they inflicted on people because even when you recognize the evil, you're so afraid of what letting it spill out into the world will do.
Hmm. Yeah, it's a wonderful thought that it's to run the unfalsifiable. If I was a person that
Mm-hmm.
during that time, what would I have done? Versus I would purposefully go back in time and do this because you're the butterfly effect, like you said, would especially that far back and that big of a thing would basically change everything that is now. And that's not good. That's not necessarily good.
Mm-hmm.
Even if the end result is a utopian society of some sort, none of us would be here to see it because we would have killed all those people because it just
Yeah.
wouldn't work out that way. So I think the best use of a time machine would probably be a quick jump back to win some Powerball lotto and use that money to do good things. I mean, with the intended purpose of doing good things with that money. Other than that, you're just gonna mess stuff up.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, all right, so speaking of messing stuff up, uh then at the at the bottom of that page there, Rand explains the patching process to Perrin in the same way that Perrin had explained it uh, to someone, or I think it was when he was talking to Fail when they were coming into the fields of Marilor. Of, yeah, it only makes sense to me that you would have to clear away the old first, like, you know, reforging something. No, you almost always have to start over.
Hmm.
You try and patch something that's broken, you'll just make it worse. And Perrin, uh, there at the top of page 90, then says, Rand, that's the most reasonable thing anyone has said on this topic. Have you explained it that way to Egwene? She's not a blacksmith, my friend. Rand smiles, which is true. Uh, and this is something I want to, a rabbit hole I want to go down next time we talk, um, because I've ever since you've brought up the topic, I'm kind of fascinated slash obsessed with the idea of cross-sex mind reading and how, much like Steele's White Guilt, how that just crystallized so many things in my mind about, the 60s and 70s and the counterculture and things that happened then and the after effects. And I'm like, holy cow, this book explains so much. Why did it take me so long to read it?
So,
Um,
so when you brought that up as a subject for our social episode, the article I'm
oh,
currently reading, it was already there because it just came across my timeline. So we'll see how this goes.
well, one of the reasons this was on my mind is something I referenced last time that I want to talk about, which was Lauren Southern uh, on with the trigonometry guys, and talking about being the trad wife, which it took me a long time to realize. Oh, that's what the hip kids say when they mean traditional. Just say traditional, damn it. Old and grumpy and out like that. But this came up again over the weekend, because I was talking to um, a couple of young ladies who have just finished their undergrad in psych, and one of whom this fall is going to start her PhD program. She's going straight to the PhD route. Um, and so I asked, "Have you ever heard of this term? Is this anything y'all ever studied?" And not only had they not heard of the term, when I explained what it meant, they're like, "Yeah, we didn't even really study anything like that." And which is shocking to me because you brought up, I don't remember if it was when we were recording or not, you brought up the numbers. I had no clue of this. What is it? Something like 80% of couples counseling fails.
95%.
Jeez Louise. So it's even higher than I remembered. I knew it was a staggering number. And so and that was my point of
Yeah, that's
uh
when for those that go back to the episodes, that's when I was talking about if I was a couples counselor, I would take a different approach of just being honest with them as if you've already come to
yeah.
me, it's only a 5% success rate because of these
Mm-hmm.
reasons. So my focus is going to be on the kids and what happens to them in this
Mm,
process. And actually, I think that would increase the success rate because what we do know about parenting and marriages is marriages do better when people do the best things for the kids because the opposite sex in cross-sex mind reading is actually attracted to traits in their partner that are good for parenting, whether that's the raising and teaching and whatever aspect of masculine aspects or the nurturing and the feminine aspects.
mm-hmm.
Men are attracted to the nurturing, women are attracted to the protection and raising. So if you focus on the kids, you're going to naturally fall into your role. And when you fall into your role, I bet you the attraction increases between the two. But back to your point, we can go into more detail
Mm-hmm.
on that when we do this episode because I got a
Yeah.
lot of things from that Lauren
Well,
Southern interview that were because there's a this is a skewed data point because she had an extremely abusive husband. And so trad
yeah,
wife
or so it would seem.
traditional versus
Yeah.
trad wife beat up, not beat up physically, but beat up in any sense of the
Mm-hmm.
word is
Mm-hmm.
different. So it's actually using an anecdote that skews everything
Well, and
else.
it also, it's my thought on that to tease it is going to be something we talked about a while ago, which is you don't have to have the same politics, but do need to have the same principles. And from what she said, it made me wonder if you had the same principles. To wit, you know, this actually, there's kind of an analogy to what you were just saying. A few pages later, when Perrin makes the point about, there are where is it here? So it's on page 92 in my copy. Um, is when they find out, they're talking about what's going on in Camelin and what that means, and Perrin makes the point, but wouldn't it be good for you if Elaine ran off? She's on the other side of this confrontation. There is no other side, Perrin. There is one side with a disagreement on how that side should proceed.
Now, what page did you say that was for you?
92.
Okay, it's 91 for me. So the thing is, as long as we keep it close,
Yeah.
as long because the pattern is going to be similar in our little episodes because
Mhm.
we're going to be in a certain time frame. But
Yeah. So the there's several reasons that jumps out at me. Is to your point, the trick with cross-sex mind reading is that, um and it's getting turned up to 11 here, because not only do you have men and women trying to talk to each other, but you have men and women at the highest levels of power. So you have all of that baggage
with
going
the
along
most
with it
at
as
stake,
well.
so that's going to increase your hyper awareness of things.
Hmm. But to using what you said as an analogy, then the subjects, those are the kids. The nations that we have to bind to us, the people that we're leading. If we can focus on that, then we can realize, okay, we are on the same side. And once and if he's able to convince everyone of that there is only one side, and it's a matter of disagreement on how we proceed to get to the goal that we all hold together, that we all believe in. Now now you can get somewhere. Um, but it's going to be more difficult than back a couple of pages where, um this
Well,
was my.
to quote myself from March 15th of 2023, we confuse sexual conflict with power struggle.
Hmm. And well, one of the reasons there is sexual conflict is because, uh so this was back on page 90 here. This was when they were, after Rand says, Perrin says she's smart, explain it to her like that, and Rand says, well, yeah, but she's not a blacksmith, which is true. I can't explain it to her using an analogy of a blacksmith because she's not a blacksmith,
Well,
talking
you
about a
can,
queen.
and this is part of cross sex mind reading is no one tries. They already make the assumption that it is,
That's a good
and he
point.
could open the same thing as I'm gonna use a blacksmith analogy. Apply this to whatever craft makes sense to you.
Yeah.
And if you open with that, if you frame it that way, it could be, she's a gardener and she can apply it to that. Oh, you can't just leave
Talk
all the
about
old
being in the
plants in there
kitchen.
and
Wait,
start
no,
planting.
sorry.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's what I'm saying. You don't have to make sexual stereotypical roles, even though on average they
Although
would
that
go
would
that
work
way.
because she grew up working in an inn and helping in the kitchen with her mother, so
Yeah.
something like that. But, um
You messed up the souffle. You don't just keep cooking the souffle.
yeah, you got to start over.
You start
Yeah.
over. Yeah.
Yeah. Um where is it here? I'll support you in this, Rand, Perrin said, but I want you to promise me that you won't let it come to blows. I won't fight Elaine. Going up against the Aes Sedai would be worse. We can't afford to squabble. There won't be fighting.
Well,
Promise me.
for
Perrin's face.
isomorphic,
Hold on.
you can't you can repurpose vodka though. You do keep just redistilling it till you get it right. So you do use the old material and you just keep going. So
Well, that's a different analogy for something else. Um, but I like this. Promise me. Perrin's face grew so hard one could have broken rocks against it. Promise me, Rand. I promise it, my friend. I'll bring us to the last battle united. That'll do then. Cause, guys, there you go. Promise me. And his face grew so hard you could crack rocks on it. And Rand promises, and then, all right, well, that's done then. Let's move on. To your
yes.
point about the schoolyard fight, about, Rand versus Logain as the schoolyard fight. It's, you have it out and then it's done, and it's all right. Well, let's move on then. We're
Well,
done.
I've said before in our episodes, one of the best things I ever did was lose a fight.
Yeah.
I was a sophomore, he was a senior, and I put up a good fight, and everybody was like, "Hey, that was pretty cool." And that could have been Logain. He could have lost the fight, but put up a damn good fight, and his
Yeah,
point still got across.
yeah. Um, Speaking of couples counseling, Androl and Pevara.
Yes.
So there's some interesting back and forth here, but page 100 is what is most interesting to me. This really jumped out at me uh
What does it
as
open
a
with so I can orient myself?
uh they're
What are
talking
they
about leather
do?
working,
Okay.
and she mentions that she's from Candor, and he's surprised because he can usually pick out an
Yeah, okay.
accent.
So I'm on you. So I'm
Yeah.
still one page up, one page off.
Yeah. So this is um before she's about to, tell her backstory about her family being murdered by dark friends and whatnot. Um and so there's to me what's so interesting here is because of this connection that they develop, they're able to move past something that, from what I understand, is one of, if not the killer in couples therapy, which is, I don't think it's discussed actually. Is it apathy? That I can't remember his name, but there's this psychologist, this famous psychologist that I've heard talk, and I've heard Peterson talk about him, and I think interview him, that um pretty much any rift between a couple could be repaired unless it was apathy. If they
You
had
might be
stopped,
thinking of Adam Lane Smith.
I think that sounds familiar.
Yeah.
So basically, if a couple is livid, if they're angry at each other, if they're at fisticuffs every night, you can fix that because there's emotion there, there's passion. That's normal. It's expected that between two people who have great affection for each other, that if things start to fall apart, that great affection will become great animosity. But if there's apathy, then it's done.
Well, yeah, because emotion is actually a form of caring, even if it's
Mm-hmm.
anger. If you're angry about something, it's because you cared about the result.
Mm-hmm.
Uh,
And so as they go back and forth here, something Androl says to her um is, where am I? Yeah. Um but I've seen how you Aes Sedai look at people like me. Say you don't find us repulsive. I hardly think what you should be. Straight answer, Pavara. Um and the word that jumped out at me was disgust. Is that you find men who can channel disgusting,
mhm.
which is another
Well,
way to
it's
say
it,
that
it's
is
it's
not
used
human or subhuman.
well, it's used in the language earlier in the books from the beginning on.
Mm-hmm.
They're tainted. The oil slick feeling. He goes into
Mm-hmm.
great detail about how it feels to feel the taint. It's if you had food that had that feeling on it, you would know it was spoiled.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, you have meat. When meat spoils, it has that slickness to it. It has
Mm-hmm.
that
Sickly sweet.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
that that sweet smell that becomes sickly.
Mhm.
That's that indication that
And
something is
that's a
spoiled.
trigger for us to not eat it.
Mm-hmm.
And we do that with people. Oh, someone has that pallor and they're sweaty and they're nasty and they're all of these things in a normal situation. They're probably sick. Keep them off in
And
a distance.
and this is where the red went so horribly wrong. It was typified by Elida, um, and other Aes Sedai who either followed
Well,
her
and
or
also
went black,
also
which be
remember, this is something I don't think he knew from the literature, but I think he knew intuitively, Jordan did, is women are more sensitive to that
mm,
than men because they have more to lose. Well, they're let me get us canceled. They are less robust physically. They can handle disease less intensely. They are they're vulnerable sexually. It's a hundred or to a magnitude of 100 to 200 times more likely that a female picks up an STD from sexual contact than a man
Hmm.
if the partner has
Hmm.
that same thing. Open wounds aside. But so, if a man with HIV has sex with a woman, the woman is almost guaranteed to get HIV. The other way around, it's a percentage shot. And so women are more vulnerable to that kind of thing, and they have to worry about children in their belly and children they're taking care of who are also vulnerable at the time. So
Hmm.
they are very sensitive to the disgust response.
And you see where a lot of the Aes Sedai start to apply that, not just the Reds especially apply that to men who can channel, but then for a lot of Reds that starts to spread to just men. And then you also see it with a number of Aes Sedai who that that feeling, that haughty arrogance starts to apply to just non-channelers, that you know we are the superior beings. But the reason that Pevara and Androl can get around it isn't just because of this bonding that's about to happen, this double bonding that creates this weird psychic link, but because she's honest, not just with him but with herself. Very well, fine. Men who can channel do discomfort me. You make me itch all over, and it has only grown worse the longer I've been here surrounded by you. Androl nodded in satisfaction of having pulled it from her. However, Pavara continued, I feel this way because it has been ingrained in me over decades of life. What you do is terribly unnatural, but you yourself do not disgust me. You are just a man trying to do your best, and I hardly think that is worthy of disgust. Either way, I am willing to look beyond my inhibitions in the name of common good. And then he makes the point that, well, you're going to have to because the taint's been cleansed now. So what we do isn't unnatural anymore. And in fact,
Mhm.
it was never unnatural. It was just dangerous.
Well, so I get what Sanderson's trying to do here, and maybe this was Jordan's intent. Who we never know in this late stage of the Sanderson writing. He's trying to write sexual tension
Mm-hmm.
into a power dynamic, into into
Mm-hmm.
into a metaphysical relationship where they're channelers. Whereas this is like the early stages. He's trying to go from the teenage years to adulthood with these two people. Right now, Andrew is the boy with cooties. And he's trying to prove to her that he doesn't have cooties because he's getting to the age of he wants to get jiggy, you know. Where in context in the text, he's trying to form an alliance with her, even though he
Mm-hmm.
knows she's uncomfortable, and he's trying to make her comfortable and admit her discomfort to to start the process of becoming comfortable together. Whereas it's again written teenage sexual tension. I get what Sanderson's trying to do here. I think he was just so clumsy with it that
Yeah.
and I wonder about his own sex life based on how clumsy he is, especially when we get to passing the bond. But it's
Yeah.
that's what he's
Well,
trying to get. That's what he's trying. So I guess give him credit that you can see it because you want the audience to see what you're trying to do, but at the same time, he is a little bit clumsy about it.
um, what isn't clumsy is how quick of a setup and payoff we get here, though. Because the part of the point, I think, of that exchange there is to set up what happens a couple pages later, which is when Pavara panics. In fact, that's the word that is used. And why? Because she's losing control. Not just losing control, but losing control to a man who can channel. And it freaks her the heck out so much that once he finally lets go, she immediately bonds him because this is never going to happen again.
Again,
But
he's trying to write a woman losing her virginity to an older man.
yeah, and I hadn't thought about that
Yeah.
before of
And
in
and
that
remember
context.
remember when I equated the male source the grasping the male source and the grasping the female source to orgasm. And that's what we have here. And
Mm-hmm.
she loses control. She loses her calm. She loses her opening of her flower, basically. And then she panics.
Mm-hmm.
And now she's the young budding, you know, teenage virgin with the older experienced male, and all of a sudden she's like, oh no, 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 this is no good anymore. This is no good anymore. And he tried
Mm-hmm.
to write that in there. I see what he was doing. It's just I don't know. I don't think I could have done it better, but I think I could. He's a professional writer. I think he probably could have done it better.
I think for me, I'll get into this more in a second because chapter 3 is where it really kind of, I think this is a great illustration of why Androl being this random guy we just met annoys me, because we've gotten to know Pevara enough that it works on her end. I really think we don't know Androl deep enough for us to be pulled into the scene because it's only half a scene. Because yeah, I mean it's pretty much set up that yeah, he would do this. Sure, this makes sense, but it's one of those, it makes sense upon reflection. It's not immediate in the moment. Everything works, everything clicks, and you're pulled into the realness of the scene because I just feel like we don't know Androl enough. He's not real enough. Not nearly as much as Pevara is, because we met her Winter's Heart, wasn't it? The end of Winter's Heart, or the prologue of Winter's Heart, where we
Yeah, well,
set up
it's
the
when Elida
hunters.
comes to her.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
that would have been, book 9, and here we are in book 14. Um all right. Anyway, but let's put a pin in that because then we get some giggity time.
Well, no, no,
Uh,
there's I don't, again, what's from notes and what's Sanderson here. There's no accidents in Jordan's writing. Contrast this to what we get to here in a little bit, and just put a pin in the idea because we'll get to it. But I have notes on some stuff in between. But the difference between Rand and his three girls versus Pavara and Andrel,
mm,
and the reason their storylines are together right now, you have what scares every woman. Okay, so when you look at male female relationships, we'll stick on that topic since we talked about cross sex mind reading. And what was our cutoff time?
2:45.
Okay, so I got time to make this thought. Okay, so not that it's going to take 25 minutes for this thought, but we have other parts of the book to get through. But where does the man have the advantage and where does the woman? Jordan wrote this in, right? So how do you bond? Not bond, circle a male and a female? If it's one male and one female, the male has to take control of the power. But if you need a circle of more than three people, the female has to be in charge, right? And Jordan wrote this in already, right? And we see this dynamic because look at sexuality. What is the difference between dating and actually having sex? One is emotional, relational, and mental, the dating, and the other becomes purely physical with an emotional component. So realistically, as a female, of course, we live in a different day and age where we got a lot of weak beta males, but in the traditional sense, we're a sexually dimorphic species. Men are bigger and stronger than the woman. She has to surrender to the male in that moment, and that's scary as hell, especially since she holds all the repercussions to that, STDs aside. When that act goes through, once you enter the physical realm of that, he is in complete control. And he's also in complete control of your fate because if you become pregnant, now you're dependent because you are going to go through a state that is not very conducive to hunting and gathering on your own
mhm,
because you have a baby in you. Now look at Rand's relationships here in a little bit. The three women, you get one of us, you get all of us, they make a coalition against him.
mhm.
So look at that as compared to how Jordan wrote creating circles with the power.
That's a
One
good point.
man, one woman, and this goes into the Lauren Southern thing. you end up in a power dynamic physically that is in history where we don't have, laptop jobs and stuff. In history was the man's control world, and the woman had to accept that fact. Whereas if you were in a coalitional type situation, the woman ends up with more power because it's 3-on-1.
Mm,
And if you want that thing you really want, man, which is the relation with woman, then it's either one or none. It's either all or none. And so you change the dynamic. And we see that in these couple chapters here. Sorry
mhm.
if I overanalyze these things, but
No, and that is actually my last point on this chapter was the last page of the chapter, which is 111 here for me. Um, when Avienda goes to Elaine. Um,
oh no, this is where, yeah. Okay, so we got to go back to 10. My 106 would probably be your 107.
okay.
But realistically, it's 106 on it's our internal thoughts. We
Hmm.
just gave Sanderson a lot of credit in the last book for writing Avienda pretty well,
Hmm.
and he completely reversed course. He matted Avienda in these chapters. It's like slapstick comedy. He's trying to use her thoughts to make funny. It it just this whole section threw me off. I
It
wanted to throw the book.
it mostly works for me because in her mind she's not making any jokes. It's 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 the it's the funny straight man. It's what he is trying to do is show what we've all often been told, which is how um inexplicable Aiel customs are, about how confusing their ways are. And he's trying to show that. And so you're
Except that we had already transcended this. Remember,
yes.
with the Schlag, we talk about going back to old things. She has already been through all that.
Mhm. Yeah, so it's this section goes on way longer than it needs to, mostly from that opening bit, which is I watch how cool I can write Avienda and
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
the Aiel Ninja Warriors.
The
Yeah.
Ideal Ninja Warriors again, and this is you're robbing from Peter to save Paul on these things because you also have Elaine's elite guard. So you're not making her look cool. You're throwing them under the bus.
Hmm.
And yeah, she was a maiden of the spear and she was an exceptionally good one. But at the same time, we see in the beginning with Tam's memories of finding Rand, the bees were elite, right?
Hmm.
So we had elite upon elite, and it was a really even fight that ended up really bloody.
Hmm.
This should have been elite upon elite, but he made this. It was a very Jar Jar Binks moment
Yeah.
going through here where she's just making them all look
This is
silly.
Keystone Cop slapstick stuff. Yeah.
And then the conversation that followed it, I'm like, they're trying to write her like Spock or something. It's like, no, no, we're past this.
Yeah.
This was in to make funny, and it wasn't that
Hmm.
funny, and we could have saved 10 pages.
When everyone finally leaves and it's just Elaine and Avienda, it's much better. Their back and forth with each other is much better than when everyone else is there. And that's a good point that Avienda is sitting there being Spock.
Mm-hmm.
And but when it's just Avienda and Elaine, then that works better. Um, the back and forth, and then ultimately what it ultimately leads to, which is what I find interesting because there's a couple layers here. The first layer is giggity because she needs time with Rand. Um, as she says, then the day of dying will come. Many of us will soon wake from this dream. There may not be another night for Rand and myself. I came to you in part to ask you about this. Um, I like that as I said on the surface, it's giggity, uh, dude brain, say pretty girl, but it's more than that because yes, that's important, but again, let's get canceled here. For Avienda, that is just a component of what is important here. Because beyond just, you know, there may not be another night for Rand and myself, there is also, um, you have my blessing, Elaine said softly. You are my first sister. Have you spent time with men? Not enough, and under other circumstances, I would remedy that lack immediately. There is no time. So it's more than just time for me and Rand. We also have to carve out time for the three of us
Mm-hmm.
because you are my first sister. Min needs to be my first sister sooner rather than later. And this is an odd situation. This isn't normal custom. But as she says at the end here, because she's finally learned this stuff, it may be appropriate to bend some of the customs. We have done well under the circumstances. I would speak to her together with you if there is time. Um, so I appreciate the end there that uh the to your earlier point about dating versus sex, or dating then sex, as it were, that's kind of what Avienda is saying, is we need to take care of the we need to take care of the emotional stuff, the companion stuff, the you know uh the family stuff, basically, is what she's saying, is that we are kind of sort of supposed to be a family here. We need to take care of that so that I can have this intimate time with Rand. Um, and then on to chapter 3. So we're back to the Black Tower. I can't remember if this is Pevara or
This
I think it's
is
Pevara's point of
Andros.
view,
It's
but
Andros'
it's
point of view in
okay.
the inn. Yeah.
It starts to blur. These scenes start to blur with whose point of view it is because they start talking to each other in their heads, which is interesting. But let me see here. I think it's 116 for me. Um, right. Okay, yeah. So it's at the bottom of 116. It's when um Koterin comes in, and he's one of Time's lackeys, and Waylon, who was one of their allies and has now been turned, is telling them all about how Logain's gonna show up today or tomorrow, and tell you all about how Time and him have patched up their differences so we can all be one, united in the last battle. And oh, by the way, you've been demoted because you never should have been given the pin in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
And there's this thought in his head. It has to be his point of view, because he's thinking here. Um, this is down on the bottom of 116 in my copy. Androl reached to his neck, to the pin there. It shouldn't matter to him. What did it really matter? But it did matter. He'd spent his entire life searching. He'd apprenticed to a dozen different professions. He'd fought in revolts, sailed 2 seas, all the while searching for something he hadn't been able to define. He'd found it when he'd come to the Black Tower. That is a big effing character moment. And I just don't care that much because we haven't had time to see it. We've only had time to be told it.
Mm-hmm.
And this is why Androl coming out of nowhere bugs me. That this really just puts a pin in it and typifies why I griped about it when he first showed up. Because I knew it's going to be a major component of the end of the story, and he comes out of absolutely nowhere, and we just don't have time. That again, my preference in hindsight would have been that it was Abel, from the people that we know, but it didn't have to be him. It could have been any number of other people that we had met and thought, well, that guy's gone now. That was a minor character. That was interesting. That was whatever. And now we've moved on. And holy crap, he's back. And we would have had some kind of emotional connection because this is someone we knew before from, this scene or this sequence of events.
Yeah, I'm
And
still torn on it because the segue would have had to be really, really good because I am with isomorphic on this, that repurposing old characters can be tricky in that it seems
Yeah.
contrived. It really does seem like, oh, well, everybody liked this guy, so we're going to bring him back in. So you would have really had to
Mhm.
have maybe a point of view of Varen when she's recruiting the Two Rivers girls, or something where
Yeah.
Abel is asking questions, or even you could have included it with when Abel went to the tower to find Matt, and all of
Yeah.
a sudden he got curious about other things. Maybe we could have had his point of view there. Uh, you would have had to have little things in there to make it work without it looking like, oh, it's another Boba Fett moment.
Hmm.
We're going to do the Mandalorian because everybody liked Boba Fett, so we're going to make a show about the Mandalorians. So it's a really tricky
Yeah.
thing. I think, to your point, it would have made the feelings better, especially since you have Two Rivers connection here, because they did in this
Hmm.
literature throw the Two Rivers in there with Janeth or
Hmm.
Jeneth. Uh, but also that could have been Abel talking about this guy's always been a hothead, even when he was a little kid. You would have had that, but again, the setup to it would have had to been more extensive coming in.
Hmm.
So, to quote Andrew Huberman, bread is just the vessel to get butter to my mouth. I think Androl is just the vessel to get Logain back into our mouth. So it really.
No, no
Okay,
homo.
Logain back
Um,
into our story. Logain back into our story. There we go.
yeah. To wit of this point, the end of the chapter, he starts telling a story to Pevara to basically just to kill time, and the story gets cut off because the story is just flavor. It's not meat. It's not something you can sink your teeth into.
Yeah, but I thought it was good flavor. It was good seasoning. That little story
Mhm.
at the end was it does flesh him out a little bit, because they're trying to put a person who's probably a lot like me, a little bit of a jack of all trades and always liking to learn new things for the sake of learning new things, and for
Mhm.
the reason he does for learning that field medicine, and how he was able to convince that wisdom to take him into his apprenticeship. That is exactly something I would do, where I'd be out doing something and there's just this thing that got in the way, and I'm like, well, maybe I need to learn about that. And that's what,
You know what it almost feels like to me is that, and I just had this thought that um Androl feels like a poor man's Tom. Like this is Tom, but it can't be Tom because Tom has other stuff to do. So it can't be him. But it feels like it should be him when you look at his backstory and how he traveled and how he ended up where he's at and all these other
I would
things.
say a different
And
person, the
it's
Jane Farstrider.
mm, that yeah, because he's got this bizarrely well, this very bizarrely well-traveled person. This does not happen in this kind of a world.
Yeah.
Um, you
Tom is
know,
well traveled because of circumstance,
mm,
and education, but he is still a very much, this is the way things should be. Let's just get his internal thoughts about real bards, where or real gleeman versus what a bard should be and
uh-huh,
stuff. So
uh-huh.
he's still in that, this is what things should be. This man Androl is a man of the moment. He is like, again, this last little flavor story he adds. Well, this thing that didn't that I this was needed in the moment, we didn't have, so maybe I should get this thing that we
So I
need in
went
a
to learn
moment.
it. Yeah,
He's the guy with the big tool belt with every tool in it versus having one tool that he knows really
hmm,
well, you know. So yeah, he's more of a Jane Farstrider
yeah,
type. In which you probably could have connected those two, because he is a little older. Maybe this was the place Noel should have been, you know.
yeah, yeah. Um, so then we switch to Rand's point of view, um, where the most interesting thing right off the bat is him thinking about the channeling sickness. Now it doesn't bother him anymore, which made me wonder, is this kind of proof that it was always, or at least mostly, psychosomatic? That since his, you know,
Well, in this
moment on
world, in the
Dragonmount, he
metaphysics
hasn't
of
had
this
it.
world, it's the
Yeah.
same.
Well, that's a good point. Yeah. Yeah. So was Luce Theron always the cause, or that conflict between Luce Theron and Rand? Was that always the ghost, because there was a lot of thought that because it
Or
seemed
was
to
he able to release himself from Moradin when he went through his Dragon
well,
Mount moment?
no, because we're about to see at the beginning of the next chapter when he gets pulled into Alon's dream shard, that shouldn't be able to happen, but it does because they still share some kind of connection.
Hmm.
And Rand thinks about that this isn't his area of expertise. Apparently, Lews Therin wasn't a dream walker, because he thinks that he knows enough, but he's no dream walker. He actually has
Ooh.
that thought
Okay, so
and
look
never was.
look for signs of this as we go forward, everyone. Uh was so Ishii was a major player in Lews Therin's rebirth or Lews Therin's demise. And they're everything seems to be connected, and then we get a real connection here. Could Ishii be the reborn version of that from the first age?
Hmm. I mean, he does talk about how this has been their fight for time immemorial.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's kind of the whole point of chapter 4 is Alon saying, "No, it's always been you and me. This is our fight, and I'm gonna win it." And Rand is saying, "No, this is about me versus the Dark One. I don't care about you anymore, Alon. I'm sorry you ended up this way, but this isn't about you and me."
Yeah, but Alon, as the philosopher, should have been like, no, you're only the avatar of the creator. I'm the avatar of the Dark One.
Mhm. Um, I also find it interesting the way this point of view ends, which is Avienda just telling him, um, "Enough talk. You will bed me now." Because when Mama needs it bad, she needs it. Um, but I also appreciate the this is actually good funny. This banter between them, um, while the maidens are being maidens, but that uh I like when Rand says, "Is this the Isle way of doing things that I haven't learned?" And she actually blushes and says, "No, I'm just not good at this stuff." So I appreciate the moment um of weakness there, because for Avienda to admit any lack for her, that's a weakness, but that she's willing to do that with Rand in this moment. I like. I also like that this then leads back to the Androl and Pevara, back to them after this bonding, and Pevara has this interesting thought, um, because she's thinking about this bond and how the men figured this out, and she also has this thought about how one of them had bonded his wife, and she has this thought, whereas it's on page 123 here, of oh yeah, it's the woman whose storehouse they're hiding in, and she's
Mm-hmm.
the wife of one of the Ashaman that they can trust, and she has this thought that here it is. But it felt wrong to use the bond in such a mundane way. This was a thing for Aes Sedai and warders, not wives and husbands. And here is why you fail, Pavara of the Red Hajah, because that ain't no mundane thing.
Mm-mm.
To Yet again, this is how you are of the world, but not in the world. And this is why you have such trouble getting normal people to um, trust you,
Yeah,
because you look at the husband and wife bond as mundane.
yeah, but I see these internal thoughts as her talking herself into that is not so much. Her this so mundane kind of thing is actually her speaking it out loud in her own head, which
Mm-hmm.
sometimes that leads to a lot of insight. Your
Mm-hmm.
ridiculous thought out loud is, wait a minute, is it as ridiculous as I thought?
Yeah.
And that's how I read that. I don't know, because the problem with text is unless there's italics or
Mm-hmm.
bold, you can read it in whatever tone you want.
No, that's a good point, because you're thinking mundane after all of these feelings, this connections, this banter with Androl, this you're literally inside his head, knowing the kind of man he is,
But
and
also what thoughts bubble up are the ones that
Mhm,
have the most feelings behind them. So just the thought of it being mundane is your emotion questioning the mundane nature of it.
mhm.
So
All right. Do we have time to blast through chapter 4 in a couple of minutes, or should we wait until?
yeah, let's stop at chapter 4 because I need to read that through more thoroughly anyways.
All right, so we'll pause. We'll hiccup here for a second, and then we will finish up with chapter 4. All right, chapter 4. Did anything jump out at you with the Pevara and Androl sections? Because the only notes I have are in the Rand point of view. That's kind of stuck right in the middle of the chapter.
Just more of the I mean, it's a decent scene with the guy coming in and,
Hmm.
you know, schmoozing up. And I actually looked him up in the cheat book.
Hmm.
He's actually the brother of the name he has here.
Yes,
Yeah.
he's the guy who he's the minor noble in from Tyr that Rand was staying at his house in Knife of Dreams,
Yeah. And
and then
his
he.
brother was actually captured by Cadsuane and
Hmm.
stilled before. So,
Yeah.
yeah, that I wish they would have fleshed that out a little bit more before this scene. Even though you get it now that I looked it up and cheated and went back and I was like,
Hmm.
oh yeah, okay, yeah, that was that guy. But
Hmm.
uh just the little slap. It was a good scene up until like right at the end, and I don't think Sanderson can resist the urge to throw these one-liners in that he thinks are going to be cool. It's like, oh, now we just do this and this and this. Well, as long as it's not a difficult task you propose, and then the crowd applauses because it's a sitcom, right? And the laugh track happens. I think
Hmm.
Sanderson's writing, he thinks there's a laugh track with it.
Yeah, that's a good way to um it's a good way to think about it. I mean, it's like it's Ideal's comment that good Talmanus may be the best mat that Sanderson can do, and oh, geez, yeah, that
Well, we haven't even gotten to my biggest
yikes.
complaint about Matt coming up, which
Oh,
is in this book. I mean, you know what it is, and I'm not going to spoil it because it's coming up. Uh,
yeah, we'll get there sooner or later. Depending on how quickly this stuff goes. Well, the so what was interesting, most interesting to me, starts a few pages in. It's page 134 in this the first edition here, and it switches to Rand's point of view after Aviendha finally lets him get some sleep. um, but the the interesting thing to me is that you have two of the top men of the Age of Legends, Lews Therin and Alon, and neither one of them seem to be exactly sure what is happening and how it is happening. Because they both seem genuinely confused as to how they're both there and why they're there.
mhm.
But then also, there's this caginess because neither one of them wants to let the other know too much. But it kind of seems clear to me that both of them don't know what's going on here, or if they know what's going on, like Rand thinks, hmm, this isn't Teleron Riyadh, but it's got to be close to it. It's a dream shard that's close to it, so I can manipulate things, I can do things. So he kind of knows where he is, but as he thinks, I've got all these wards set up. Did you pull me here or did I come here myself? How did this happen? And so even now at this late stage, what is happening here appears to be something unique even to the Age of Legends.
Mhm. Yeah, and this is where Jordan obviously is taking this whole scene right here is a really good depiction of where Jordan is pulling from Eastern philosophy, specifically Buddhism. Uh, and I don't know if it's kind of vague because he's doing it in this meta magic fantasy world, but
Hmm.
if it's Zen Buddhism or Asuka or whatever, but depending on which direction you go, whether it's the oneness or the not self or that concept that is actually the last pretty much step towards enlightenment. And we're seeing the duality here is where Rand has reached a point, not perfectly, but reached a point of not self, where he is not Rand at fighting Lews Therin anymore. He is them all. He is
Hmm.
everything. He is the dream. He is the land. I think he's realizing, as the prophecy stated, that he is one with the land.
Yeah.
So you look at that concept of the oneness, and he's getting there. And Ilan, the other philosopher in the whole thing, is missing the forest for the trees because he's still stuck in the battle. And he is thinking of a void. He is thinking of this nothingness taking over, where Rand is thinking of a oneness, of an everything, of a I am not me, but I am everything.
Hmm.
But everything is also me. I'm Lews Therin, I'm Rand. I'm not either. And he's reaching that point of enlightenment if you really follow the multi lives, the reincarnation kind of pattern of Buddhist philosophy. You should be getting closer and closer and closer to that realization of not self.
There's I just brain fired on what it was. I've referenced this before. There was an interesting episode of the Y Files a while back that I kept waiting for the end because the way he structures them is, here's the story. Let me reel you in, and then you get about two-thirds, three-quarters of the way through, and but is any of this true? And there was one where I kept waiting for that, and then he never got there, and I was like, wait, that was all true? What? And it was this I think it was a DARPA Marine Corps lieutenant colonel who was basically doing what you're talking about, but coming at it from a physics point of view.
Hmm.
And I can't remember if I made the Wheel of Time connection or not when I first brought this up, but it's interesting to me that um, Robert Horton James Rigney was a a combat Marine in Vietnam. He got his bachelor's in physics, but he's also clearly exposed to and understands to some degree Buddhism and Zen, some of these other philosophies. Hinduism, the wheel, is a major component of this whole thing, the wheel of time. Um, but that there is there's this DARPA guy. It was this really long memorandum basically on how we can use sensory deprivation and psychedelics and I forget what it's called, but if you listen to two separate tones in your ears, something weird happens to your brain because your brain
Oh
tries to
yeah,
make sense of
yeah,
that.
yeah. What is that?
Yeah.
What is that called? Trying to remember
So
the direct name of it, but yeah, we studied that in neuro a little bit. Yeah.
he was using these, techniques, these hard science techniques to say we can do this weird woo woo magic stuff. I think we can make this happen by doing these known techniques, kind of thing. And that, in a sense, that is what's going on here. Is uh, I think a lot of this has perhaps been, more so than I realized the first several times I read through the books, of trying
Well,
to square that circle of what is magic and what is science.
on your what is the channel called again?
The Y files.
The Y files on your Y files, which we would kind of it's probably associated the name based on the X Files show that we used to watch. Uh, let's rewind to Androl's section again because there was a spot in there that actually is important now that you bring that up and pique my mind. They're talking about is this the same person or did they switch
Mm-mm.
souls or whatever? And we've talked about this recently with the MK Ultra experiments and stuff. Yeah, you can. You can do that to somebody. and we know the ways in with using technology and using human psychology and whatever. And again, this is just like a very fast forward metaphysical version of that. What are they doing with the mind, with the Murdral and the 13 sisters? Are they doing a form of compulsion that actually does change the brain in a way that they're still the same person, but that person that would make completely different decisions?
Or are they suppressing or ripping out the soul and putting in a new one? Because I
Yeah,
remember that was a
with the
debated
interaction with the
topic.
actor though, with the
Yeah.
interaction with the actor though, I would say basically what they're doing is, we talked about going back and finding baby Hitler, right? What they're doing is they're finding every part of your brain, to go into Sapolsky's work, that what happened a second ago, what happened 5 minutes ago, what happened a year ago, what happened with your genetics.
Mm.
And so the genetic portion of your brain that has the propensity to good or evil, and basically changing the experience of the brain to make it go the course of evil. I am still the same me, but I've made all the decisions along the way have said, you know what, that dark one is a great thing. Oh, Taim, he's always been my dude. I'm going to do whatever he tells me to do.
And the vacancy, the otherness behind the eyes
Mm-hmm.
isn't because there is another consciousness there. It's because
Because they're just a
that was
different person.
forced. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it is, yeah.
A
So it
different
has
person
radically
within the
changed them.
same parameters,
Yeah. I can't remember if that answer is ever, or if that question is ever fully answered. So we'll have to keep an eye out because I do like, to me, it's one of those things. The debate is more interesting than the answer because to your point, that is something that kind of jumped out, but I was gonna, wait and see where it goes. Was Androl's point of view of he has to believe that that's someone else there. That's like they shoved another soul in his head. He has to believe. He doesn't want to let himself believe that he could be made to do that. He'd rather
Mm-hmm.
believe, no, that they'll destroy me somehow. They'll rip my soul out. They'll subsume it. Something. But that won't, if they do this to me, that won't be me. I'll be dead. And in a sense you will be dead, but to your point, it could still be you.
Mm-hmm.
But
Well,
it
yeah, and
is.
it's what you don't know what circumstances changed the thing. We always talk about in our social episodes, well, we talk about bad childhood and stuff like that, and it's like, well, how did you turn out okay?
Mhm.
And it was like, well, you got to look back and you say, oh, well, what's different? Maybe if I was an only child, I wouldn't have, because I think part of I think personally, and this is just me from my own internal bias making this assumption, that the fact that I had younger siblings helped me to take a better path because I always was protective of them in those
Mm.
same situations. What if I was an only child? Then I might have been an Ed Kemper. Who knows? Right? What little things along the way, and I think it's a rewiring of those little things where a different person comes out the other end. And someone who's had a traumatic background that causes them to be antisocial, they probably would have dead eyes just in regular human circumstances.
Yeah. Yep, probably. Um, Boy, you're sending me down a rabbit hole here because
Yeah, well, you just
so
said something that triggered a rewind there, but we can get back to Rand.
well, no, but so one of the rabbit holes of just throw this thought out there and kind of let it stew is how does the turning capital T work and what part do the Madral play in it? And I find that interesting because um they
I believe they're used as a poison for the good, to
mm,
to to kind of sever the good ties that are already ingrained in the brain. Because remember, with compulsion, or with the madness, with the taint, with the madness, Nynaeve found the spikes
mm,
in the brain, and the spikes were what were disrupting everything. They might be the taint. They might be the taint
hmm.
in this thing to create disruption, which allows for a rewiring. Because if everything's running good, then you stick your hand in it, you're going to get shocked. But if
Well,
you create a disruption in a short in the system, you can take the wire and move it somewhere else.
my thinking was, because so far as I think Jordan has said this explicitly, that creatures of the dark don't have a soul. That because they're not true creations, they're in the Tolkienian ideal, they're corruptions of creation, not true creations.
Mm-hmm.
Which is the um, supposition for why they can't go through a gateway, because the gateway somehow utilizes the world of dreams to bridge 2 points in reality, and that's why when they go through, they just collapse like puppets with the strings cut. Is the analogy that I think Rand uses in Knife of Dreams, when we first see the Death Gates and learn why, for up until that point we had been theorizing, us nerds had been theorizing because we'd never been told, but we'd always wondered, why doesn't Demander just open up a gateway and just send 100,000 Trollocs, storming Tyr or whatever? Because he's Demander the General. Why doesn't he just, go on a rampage? Because he can't. And the so my train of thought that you sent me down was, well, if they're somehow pulling out the soul or putting in another soul or even just corrupting the soul, what is it that the Murdral do there? Because they don't have a connection to the world of dreams. They don't have a soul. And then I like your idea that their pure evilness is just a poison
Mm-hmm.
that is used to basically create the seams, to create cracks that then you can get
Or
into.
or we also don't know if the Murdral survived the process. They could be a vessel for the
I
soul that
think
already
I
exists.
think we're told they don't. I think we are told when we first learn about it that it destroys,
Yeah, they could
but
be
I'm
the
not sure.
receiving vessel because they are empty.
Oh,
And when
there's a
something's
thought.
pushed out just by pure osmosis, it's going to go that direction. And
Yeah.
and the entry of a soul into them could kill them. Now, why you need 13 for that, I don't know, but I think Jordan just like to play on numbers too. But it's that could be the source. I mean, this is one of those that I think never fully got answered.
Yep.
I might reread that Isam section and see if he gives more hints in there.
Um. There's actually a fairly lengthy wiki entry into it, but I'm not sure what their sources are here. Um. Looks like uh, something from the Dragon Mount forums. So I'll look a little closer into that next
Well,
time,
then
because we're
you're
not done with the
also
turning anyway.
yeah, then you're also in the field of Androl wants to say a new soul was put in there, an evil soul. But what about no soul? We know from Trollocs and Murdral we have consciousness without a soul
Yeah.
in this metaverse. So you could just remove the soul, and then this person is as the old
Hmm.
school blank slate would be. Then you could quote unquote re-educate them.
Yeah, that's something I hadn't considered. I don't know if I ever remember reading anyone make that point, but yeah, there's another different kind of terrifying thought.
Yeah, because
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, if a soul was required for cognition in this world, in this universe, Trollocs wouldn't be able to talk. Trollocs wouldn't be able to communicate. They wouldn't have their own feelings. Remember, they have to be forced to fight sometimes because they're scared, or they fight when they shouldn't fight because they're angry or have
Hmm.
bloodlust. So it's there is consciousness without a soul in this universe if that theory on the soul being void in Murdral and Trollocs is true.
Hmm.
Which makes you wonder what happened to the soul of the humans that were used to make the Trollocs and the Murdral. Well, I guess they end up as Thakandar blades. We see that. So the humans that are used to make those blades probably end up being the raw material to make the Trollocs later, I guess.
Something like that.
Yeah.
Uh, I think we're told that Murdral were an accident of the creation of Trollocs. Like they were
Yes.
a byproduct
Hmm.
of whatever it was that what's his face used to, whatever method he used to create the Trollocs. There was this byproduct that created the Murdral that I don't think
Yeah.
he.
And
I
and,
think
and
he says
Gollum
he
were
didn't fully
something he
understand.
created and then scared the shit out of himself, so he stopped creating them. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Um. So back to Rand and Alon here and their little philosophical banter. Um, I find it interesting that Rand slash Luce Theron is kind of able to scare him off the way he does. That um because I would think he of all people, because I'm pretty sure he's actually a strong dreamer or dream walker, as opposed to Luce Theron. That shouldn't he recognize, hey, he's able to impose his will because we're close to. So this is a dream shard close to Teleron Riyadh, but for whatever reason, I find it interesting then that he gets so freaked out. Uh, uh, here it is at the end of this scene.
Hmm.
Uh, at the end of this POV scene, um, this is wrong. Morden said, visibly shaken. I mean, that's a big effing deal
Well,
to be
this is
visibly shaken.
this is something where we read the same thing two different ways. Where you're saying that he should know better.
Hmm.
I read it as in he does know better, and
Yeah.
he was trying to impose his will on this one dream shard, and someone was
Uh,
overcoming his will no matter what he did.
that makes sense because then that connects to what he said earlier about how your trick against Wiremon that you use. You know, it's not. Yeah, we're just a few paragraphs earlier. Don't think I will believe your simple tricks, Luce there. And Wiremon was shaken by what you did to him, but it's not such a difficult thing. Holding sight in and listening for people's heartbeats to speed up. So apparently, Daredevil is just a powerful male channeler.
Well,
Um,
but also you look at that situation, everybody in that line's heartbeat would have sped up because even if you were innocent, you were scared shitless.
Yeah, yeah. Well,
Yeah.
so there's Morden rationalizing, and
Mhm.
this is Rand saying, it wasn't a trick. It was, I'm going to impose my will. And that that's that's an interesting thought that what may have maybe making him visibly shaken is that he's trying to impose his will back and can't.
Yeah.
And that to his mind, since he created the dream shard, that should not be possible.
Yeah. The is and the ought. He thought this ought to be
Mm-hmm.
the unpenetrable to other people's will because I created this is my shard. And
Yeah.
because it was overcome, it's like, well, what is just overcame your ought. And that's actually what scares people the most in real life. When you think things should be a certain way and things are different all of a sudden. That's why we're afraid of the dark
Mm.
because we can't we lose ourselves to the imagination of what we hope is there.
It's why we see shapes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's why we see shapes in the dark. Is we're rationalizing
Mm-hmm.
what's happening there. We're trying to put something tangible on the intangible. Um,
There's one little bit in their conversation that I thought was a contradiction from earlier texts. Before we move on,
okay.
Morden names Sindane, and Rand says, Sindane, last chance. Your master has gained some humor, I see. And Morden says it was not meant as humorous. And Rand agrees, as his loose there, and Rand's self is, oh, I guess not. That
Hmm.
doesn't make sense. But we do have the Dark One being humorous in his reincarnations in the past. And we have confirmation of that from Shaidar Heron in Erengar and Asengar.
Well,
Because just the fact that Halima was Bethamel, Shaidar Heron actually says out loud, I believe, that the Dark One has a sense of humor in the fact that that was the case.
I didn't
Or no,
remember
maybe it was Ossengar that
pointing that
said the
out.
Dark One has a one of the people in the scene says the Dark One, not Halima, because
Mm,
Halima was
yeah.
bitter, but one of the people in that scene points out that the Dark One always had a sense of humor.
There could be a sense of irony, and we would attribute that as humor, but it doesn't mean that it was humorous or was with humorous intent.
Well, I
Um,
mean,
would be the reading of that, maybe.
You're giving the lecherous chosen a female body. That is, if any irony there is with intent. You could have selected anybody in the entire world.
Yeah, we've seen the new Grendel as well.
Yep.
We saw her in the prologue, hideously ugly.
Uh-huh.
You know,
Yeah.
um, and then obviously the name Last Chance. Um, but it's possible too that I mean, he's not saying here there is no dark sense of humor to the Dark One. He's just saying it was not meant to be. And in her case, maybe it wasn't. Maybe there was no humor meant. Maybe it was. I'm tired of you going your own way. This is your last chance.
Well, but there's different types of humor too. There's humor that everybody goes ha ha, even if it's self-deprecating or at someone's expense. And then there's humor that only the person saying it says ha ha.
That's a good point. And I think we can be pretty sure that the Dark One doesn't care if anyone else laughs along with his joke.
Well, because they still will.
Yeah, they'll laugh in the end. So speaking of finishing off, so then my last thought is the closing thought here in this point of view, which I find interesting and wonder if it is foreshadowing things to come, which is here, willing something to be true could make it so. If only things were that simple in the real world.
Yeah,
And I think
that's
that's
right on
just
the that's
idle
our yeah,
speculation.
yeah, that's right on
That's
spoiler territory too.
Yep.
Yeah, so
That's let me
well, it's
say
also no
something
accident
painfully obvious.
Perrin was in the first part of this section too. So
Yep. Yep. That's a good point. Um, and then the last bit is Androl and his crew finding Logain and then getting ambushed, and everything goes dark. They all get captured. Uh, which um yeah, we'll talk more about it when we go back to their scene. So that's all I got uh for that. Like I said, I wanted to stop at chapter 5 because chapter 5 and 6 is Rand's big deal, and I think that probably needs a fair amount of time. So we'll spend time on that next week, and that will be that for today. Any closing thoughts? I don't think we had any spoilery things. I mean, it's hard to do spoilers when
on the last book.
we're in the spoilers. These are the spoilers. Everything's a spoiler.
Yeah.
Um, some of these are more just thought balloons and thought experiments of, hey, I wonder about this.
Mm-hmm.
But then there is the biggie of the end and why I keep playing around with the world of dreams. So if you know, you know, um, for what we're going to talk about when we get there. Any final thoughts on this stuff so far?
No, I think I got everything I need. I'm looking at my notes real quick. Yeah, I think I got everything off my chest that I needed to for these chapters. Uh, keep the comments coming. Isomorphic. Scott, where the hell are you at?
Yeah,
Uh,
shout out, bro.
yeah, I'm hoping everything's okay because he was consistent. Even on our not subpar episodes, he would still give us something.
Yeah.
So, unless he is isomorphic.
Well, we've never seen them in the same room together, so
True, true. Although Scott did say he was from East Texas, which is not very much like Russia. Uh,
no.
no. Okay, so are we gonna do a quick short social episode, or are we gonna call it a day?
We're gonna call it because I feel weird, and I don't know if it's bad weird or just weird.
Okay, so we'll be back on the social train on next Wednesday, as far as I know. And Wheel of Time again next Friday. We'll try to, you said the next two chapters are meaty.
Yeah, chapter 5 and 6 are Rand's little powwow. And then it pretty much runs straight into the all right, now it's time for the last battle. And then it's last battle from there on. Well, no, because there's gotta be some Rand and Matt stuff, which we'll talk about when we get there. I'm still not sure how I feel about that. Not probably not the part you're thinking of. I'm thinking of before we get there. Anyway, we'll see how far into it we get next time.
Okay, we're gonna sign off on the public part, but don't hang up yet, Heath, because I want to go over this possible equation to have our page numbers synced.
All right.
All right, see y'all later, guys.